Hey there, everybody. Dr. Steve Yano here, talking about speech, argumentation, things like that, my online teaching. This video is the second video after every speech has to be a case to the next statement I'm going to make in review of like how to make your speech really unique, how to make your speech stand out, how to make it really different than the other speeches out there. And we're going to talk a little bit about video games, I think, for this example. That's why I have this image up here. Plus, I just really like it. I think it looks pretty cool. So, welcome. If you're just joining us, these videos are mostly for my class, but you can watch them too. I think they're very useful. They could be very useful for you. So the second controversial thing that I'm going to talk about in terms of making your speech better, last time we talked about every speech is a case for something. What we need to look at this time is what we might call, let me pick a better font here so you can see it. There we go. This is all straight out of the book, right? So you got to think about your speech in terms of which one of these you're going to do. And I'm a big fan of saying that the more theoretical the topics, the better. Or those are better and easier to kind of prove than the specific ones. And I know that sounds a little bit counterintuitive, but one of the things that you have to determine is which one you'd rather talk about. So most of you gave sort of practical questions. So you would say, this family member is awesome, admirable, wonderful. I love my grandma. This kind of a speech, right? Several of you gave a speech like that. Or you gave a speech, you said, like, this athlete is superior to this other athlete. And then some of you gave speeches about just, the variety of different things. You guys are quite good at selecting really, really, really interesting topics. Things like how to overcome some adversity. Okay? So some of these can be very practical. These might be actually much more, if we wanted to make them more theoretical, we could do things like this, which is, like, is this even possible? What makes someone admirable or wonderful? That might be the thesis of the speech. And you can use the particulars of your family member to kind of use it to prove that much more broad and much more interesting kind of question. Because if you just stick specifically to your family, the audience might lose interest. They might be like, well, that's nice for you, but I don't really see how this is connected to me. And this is a question. This is kind of a place where you can build a thesis where the audience is much more involved, much more interested, and much more into it. What makes someone an outstanding player, whatever league you're talking about, this kind of thing, right? And then some of you talked about problems you might have, like sort of waking up on time or sleeping late or procrastinating or having writer's block or not knowing what to do research-wise. You might want to think about broadening your question to something more like, something like that, right? So these questions here, I find to be things the audience can access a lot more than very specific ones where the audience might not have this problem, or they might not be interested in the particularities of that sport, or they don't really care about your family. I mean, I know your family's wonderful, but they might not really care about them, right? That's kind of the sad truth of it, right? So you really have to think about that. And then once you have that in mind, then you can kind of look to how to sort of build the case. So let's say we wanted to talk about video games. We have some options here. We can talk about a specific video game is the best one. A specific system is the best one. Somebody gave that speech. You might have seen the speech about PC gaming versus console gaming. Kind of interesting. Or you can ask the question, why should we play video games? Are video games dangerous? Or we can be even more firm and we can say, beneficial, right? That might be harder to prove. But these are all possible topics, but you can see right away that there are some topics, probably these three, that are more likely to get audience interest than these. And we can, of course, talk about these two within here. Like, we can play video games. Yeah, and we should play these kind of games. Or we should play it on this system. Are video games dangerous? No, not necessarily, because da-da-da-da-da, this kind of thing. So whatever your topic is, one of the things you need to do is kind of designate a rubric, or what we call a way of determining whether or not you are right. Now, that sounds kind of simple, right? Well, if they believe me, I'm right. Yeah. Well, I don't know. It's kind of a tough thing to say because the audience is going to come in with their own standards and their own kind of ideas about this. So in the book, it talks about a way of really doing this. And that way is by asking the 4 questions and setting those up there. So let's say we wanted to say that playing video games is beneficial. Maybe that's our topic that we want to do. So the 4 questions we have to ask about are, this is straight out of the book. I think it's page 72, 73. The next one, they call it something different. I think it's quality. Quality or degree. I forget what they say. Could be either one. What's the intensity or the quality of it? And then policy. What can we do? Now this sets up a way of providing to the audience. I'll move this down so you can see it. Providing the audience a way of making sure you've covered all the bases for the way they're going to judge. Right? And the book talks about this. I've made another video about this too. But a lot of you didn't really do this. So when you're talking about, let's say you're talking about an admirable person, and you want to prove that someone's admirable, the conjecture point would say, well, who is unquestionably admirable in the world? What do people say about admirable people? Who are the people that everyone admires for being good, wholesome, etc., right? So this is what conjecture is. It's like, okay, what's out there? What are we talking about? In any speech you give, this is a good place to kind of take inventory. Now, the speech will not be given in this way. What you're trying to do is kind of create an inventory of different things that you think will be useful for creating the speech. So these are all things that should go into the speech, because this is like where you're going to ground your discussion of somebody being, mattering. Okay, definition. What's understood about it? So let's say some of you are talking about a specific person, right? And so under definition, you'll also need to provide answer to this question. What makes a good dad, mom, grandma, etc.? And you can do research on these questions. I know it seems silly, but go and look at the stories, the literature, poems, stories, novels, television, and film, where these things are depicted, where there are characters from fiction or from history or from other things that people look at, theater, where we have models of this. What makes someone admirable or good? How do we understand that? Well, we know that someone's admirable when they are understood to be this kind of person. Now, you see how that's different from conjecture? You're just using words to kind of establish what the definition of it is. But you can also define it in more general terms, like a good soldier or a good driver is a very different set of criteria than a good mom or good dad, right? Or a good teacher is very different than maybe a good professor. Maybe you might want to say that. Or a good doctor is very different than a good surgeon. Whatever you want to do. Most of you are doing family stuff, so we should keep it there. So what are the qualities that make a good grandma? How do we understand a good grandma? What do we understand that to be? Well, according to us in our society, we think this, and I got this from this movie where we all know we love that grandma character. We love that dad figure in something. Why do we like him so much? Because he's this way, and you kind of list the motives. So a lot of times definition is about motives that people or characters have that we can draw on to help make our definition or understanding. A good way to think about the definition question is as understanding. I think that's a really good way to think about it, because definition often makes us think of the dictionary. Might be better to think of it as understanding. Okay, the next one is quality or degree. So, how admirable, how good, compared to the people we admire, how close, right? That kind of a thing. If we're playing a video, well, we're not doing that one anymore. We're doing something family-oriented. But if we're doing the video games one, what exists, what's out there? That would be studies about video games, things like that. What video games does for you? What does the research say? What about the social interaction? What about competitions? What about being able to make a lot of money or win, fame and honor, get involved in different organizations, things like that? What's understood about it? What's the definition of a video game? And what makes a video game good? Or what makes something a harmful thing to do and what makes something helpful? That might be a good definition too. When we look at quality or degree, how much playing is good? How little playing is good? How much playing is dangerous? How little playing is dangerous? What are the kind of conditions and the ways that we should play? You know, people talk in video games about carpal tunnel syndrome and damage to your hands and things like that. How should we hold the unit? How should we hold the controller? What kind of lighting should we have in the room? And how should we decide how much we should emotionally invest in these games? A lot of people get really into them, really into the characters. So the policy, what can we do? Well, for the one where you're admiring your family member, you can understand how special I think they are. Now, that's a policy. You're asking them to understand something. Compared to the people in their own life, you say you probably have a special person too, and you probably admire them, and they probably have the same kind of things that mine does. For video games, you can say, make a plan of when, how, and how long you can play. What time of day is best for you? How can you afford them? That might be a part of it too. How do you measure the benefits? How to join a league and play competitively with people, meeting other people in video games and stuff like that, the social benefits of it, depending on what your speech says. So this is how you create that rubric of making sure you've given enough to the audience for them to understand what it is that you would like them to do. We didn't really do this one, did we? We did My Grandma is the Best Grandma. Now, this still works even if you want to do something very overtly political. Let's say you want to do a speech about something happening in the government, something about COVID-19, something about tax policy, something about voting policy. Some of you did that. Some of you did some highly political topics. These all apply to every speech. So I want to encourage you to write these down and brainstorm, and you will come up with a much, 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 much better speech because it'll be framed better. Instead of just telling us a couple of stories about why you like your grandmother, you will have gone through an entire discussion of who the admirable people are in society. Before we get to the question of my grandma, who are the admirable people? What makes them admirable? What have they done? How do we understand admiration? And when we look to my grandma, how admirable is she in comparison to all this? Let's compare. Let's look at some of the details here. Is she less admirable than this person, but more admirable than somebody who did this? Yeah, because of her history. Let me tell you the story of how she immigrated. Like a lot of you can do that. Yeah, so I think this is good. The 4 questions. It's in the book. It's in the book that you guys need to look at. It's very, very important kind of guide to help you kind of do this. And I think that if you were to do this, you're going to have a lot more to say. A lot of you are only speaking 2-3 minutes, and you got dinged for that in the grades. That's fine. You can try again. And if you do this, you'll be able to push out and make your speech a lot more sort of memorable, because it has a lot of depth to it and a lot of complication to it. You're not just saying, this is why I think this is, here's reason 1, 2, 3. That's only like 1/3 or maybe 1/4 of what you're supposed to do. When you're in a speech, you have to cover all 4 of these things, and you do it in a way, like in the last video I said, you can put it in the order of making a case. So a lot of this stuff goes into the narratio, into the story. A lot of this is all that, right? Then after you get the partatio, you're into quality and policy. So when we think about it in terms of organization, these are the 3 parts that this deals with. And then up here, exordium is kind of on its own, but it could be part of this too. This is all pretty much narratio. Then when we get down to the end, we have our conclusion, where we're going to leave them with something that haunts them, something that sticks with them, makes them feel something when they think about that topic, so that they go through what you said again, and they're more likely to kind of lean your way, or lean towards the feelings you want them to have, or lean towards the policy you want them to do. So that's kind of how we put it together. I know I said I was going to talk about video games. I didn't really talk about them that much. But, yeah. So when you're putting your speech together, always think in terms of the specific or the general. Which one do you want to do? Specific topics are great. You can say one game is the best, or one thing you absolutely should do, or one player is the best. But the general topics give you a lot of other things to think about, too. What makes a good player? What makes a good video game? These are also really kind of interesting topics you can do that can be inspired by some of the things you believe in your life. It really opens up another way to talk about it. What is social justice? And you can give that entire speech on that definition of it. And the 4 questions, like I just showed you, help provide depth and provide things to talk about in your speech that are more than just you. You have to go out and get those kind of proofs and things like that. So the next video I'm going to talk to you about a couple of other things you need to do to really improve and make these things a bit better from the last couple that I've seen. So far we have every speech that you make is a, what did I say? It's a case. You're making a case. You're trying to prove something every time you're making a case for something. Second one is you need to ask the 4 questions to really generate depth on whether your topic is specific or general. You need to determine what you want to do first, and then generate depth through the asking of those 4 questions and going through the material, trying to brainstorm and figure out what it is you might want to talk about. Next, we'll talk about delivery a little bit. I think. I still have a couple of other things I want to talk about. Yeah, delivery is next, and we'll talk about that in the next video.